Hey guys, the Consummate Shill here. If you're new to the channel, I'm here to bring you honest, nuanced, and in-depth reviews of games and actionable information to assist you in deciding where you spend your hard-earned money in the gaming world. You can rest assured that I've actually spent significant time playing these games, and I do this because in this wasteland of watered-down, lifeless, crap reviews, real gamers deserve an unbiased and honest voice from one of their own. So join me as we take a look into the good, the bad, and everything in between in Niffelheim.
Ancient lords of deceit abducted the soul floating quietly towards Asgard. With faithful sword and his fate in his hands, he enters Niffelheim, the harsh land of ancient spirits.
Niffelheim is a 2D side-scrolling action survival RPG in a Norse fantasy setting, where you play a warrior who has fallen in battle, but instead of moving on to the afterlife in Asgard, you find yourself trapped in Niffelheim. Your goal is to survive and fight your way through this harsh and dangerous world in search of a way to Valhalla. The game is developed and published by Ellada Games, which is a small indie studio established in 2013. In the spirit of full disclosure and transparency, the developers were kind enough to provide me with a review key for this game, but as always, the thoughts and opinions discussed here are my own. Structurally, the game borrows many survival mechanics and 2D side-scrolling action systems that you've seen before, but blends them together in their own unique style, and the resulting product is a relatively deep, intriguing, and fun survival dungeon crawler. You choose from a pool of 4 characters to start out, which are all pretty similar with varying health and combat statistics. There really isn't anything in the way of customization here. Just a note, there is multiplayer co-op and/or PvP offered in the game. I'm not going to touch on that because I have no experience with it. You also have the option to add bots to your game to simulate this experience, but from what I've read, the AI isn't great and it tends to interfere with your offline experience in negative ways. So I chose to forego this mechanic entirely. That's not to say it wouldn't be enjoyable, but for the purposes of this review, this is an entirely single-player experience. You begin the game with little to no equipment, a stripped-down basic castle you call home, and a large hostile world you'll need to explore, harvest, and vanquish as you progress through the many stages and ever-increasing difficulty on your quest to escape this world and make your way to Asgard. Your ultimate goal is to collect all the portal fragments necessary to open the portal to Asgard. These fragments are random drops off the many dungeon bosses you'll encounter throughout the game. Many obstacles will be thrown at you along the way. An undead horde continually attacks your base, somewhat infrequently throughout the game. A notice will pop up, giving you a countdown until the invasion, and when it expires they'll attack, increasing in power for each subsequent invasion. Other examples of this are the ultimatums you receive. There are priests that also infrequently give you a task to complete, such as craft and give them a difficult to craft potion within a certain period of time, or they'll send a mob to attack and loot your base. However, somewhat unfortunately, I can't provide much information on that particular mechanic because I was able to complete all the ultimatums during my playthrough. We'll go ahead and get combat out of the way first, as it's fairly simple and by no means the main focus of the game. You have a single melee attack with varying speeds depending on the weapon type, a shield that provides some extra armor, and the ability to actively block incoming damage at varying rates depending on the shield, and a ranged attack with weapons consisting of various bows and cannons. There's also a dragon you can unlock later in the game that you can call on with a surprisingly short cooldown to rain fire down on your enemies in the outdoor settings. And truthfully, that's about as far as the combat goes in a pure mechanical sense. They didn't go for a complex, multi-move based system here, but that's not to say it's a weak point. I mean, I thought it was fine, and while it was sort of mundane and repetitive at times, there are enough other systems that accentuate the combat to keep you interested. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I'm a big fan of deep, substantive, diverse combat in games, and you're just not going to find that here. So if that's an issue for you, this may not be the right game for you. But I never really felt that the simplicity of the combat detracted from my experience. Now, crafting and gathering are your nuts and bolts of this game. This is what you're going to be doing the majority of your playthrough, and every element of the crafting techniques on offer are essential to your progression in some way, shape, or form. Niffelheim is truly a gatherer and item hoarder's wet dream. The immense amount of different components and materials in the game world is almost on the level of something like Don't Starve. You're also offered ample chest space in your castle so that you can expand on and hoard all of this shit too, so you never really feel pressured to get rid of anything once you get it into storage. This was a great feature for me because I'm like the definitive pack rat when it comes to games like this, and I like my inventory space to be vast and expandable. You don't hoard for the sake of hoarding though, because you're going to use these materials in the extensive recipes amongst the 4 crafting stations: the forge, sawmill, kitchen, and the alchemy station. And just a note before we get started here, all the items used in the game for the most part will have durability that degrades as the item is used. You can repair the items with repair kits, but if the item degrades to 0 durability, it'll be destroyed and lost forever. The forge is where you'll first turn raw materials into usable components for crafting armor, weapons, and various upgrades throughout your castle. This is one of the ways you're able to customize and accentuate your combat style a bit, as I mentioned before. There are 3 melee weapon types: swords, hammers, and axes. Swords are fast weapons with moderate damage and have a chance to proc a bleed effect. The bleed does damage over time and causes the target to take increased damage. Hammers are similar to swords in damage, but are a fair bit slower. They have a chance to proc a stun that will stun your target for 3 seconds. Axes are similar to hammers in speed, but have the highest damage out of the 3 weapon types by far and increase your critical hit chance. You can also craft cannons and cannon shells in the forge. The cannons are a bit more powerful than the bows that are available, but the ammunition is a bit more expensive. Honestly, while I tested them all out, I didn't utilize the ranged weapons much because I didn't find them very intuitive or effective. The cannons do have really good animations when firing and reloading though. Now, at first, I was trying to decide which weapon was the best to use in each scenario in combat, but eventually what I realized is they're all best used together in sort of a juggling act. You can hotkey and switch your weapon at any time instantly during combat, so what I found worked the best for me was using the sword up front to proc the bleed for the dot and the increased damage taken. Then once that's applied, swap out for the hammer or axe depending on the enemy. If the enemy had fast attack speed, I would use the hammer in order to slow down its damage with stuns and reduce the frequency in which I had to block. If the enemy had slower attack speed, I could get several swings in between attacks. I'd just swap to the axe and let the damage roll. As far as armor goes, there are several sets of armor in the game that all offer varying bonuses when wearing all 7 pieces of the set. You have a breastplate, helmet, pauldrons, bracers, boots, a belt, and folds, or leg armor. The majority of set bonuses consist of extra defense against certain types of enemies, with the exception of a set that's more offensive-based. I crafted nearly every set during my playthrough and found swapping between different sets of armor according to the types of enemies you're fighting was very useful. Juggling the various weapons and armor types throughout the game was a necessary and interesting aspect that requires your attention. Having to adapt to different situations helps keep you on your toes and interested. The Sawmill is where you'll craft various items for gathering, combat, and world progression. Specifically, picks to carve out paths and gather materials in the mine, axes to gather wood, shields to defend yourself in combat, and doors to path your way through the mines and dungeons. The mining picks and axes have varying durability, quality, and effectiveness depending on the level and type of tool you craft. The higher the quality of materials used to make the tool, the more effective and durable it'll be. Shields have an armor value and a damage reduction percentage value. The armor value just adds flat armor to your total defense, while the damage reduction value is what makes the shield really worth upgrading and actively using. You have to actively press a button to block, and in doing so, you reduce the damage you take by an incredible amount. And truthfully, the amount the damage is reduced by is inexplicable to me. For example, towards the end of the game, you're going to be getting hit for, say, 100 damage if you take one to the face, and you have a shield that reduces damage taken by 80%. Logically, it should follow that if you block that same attack, you would take 20 damage, but it doesn't work that way. Upon blocking hits, I'm taking between like 2 and 6-ish damage for a hit like that, depending on the enemy, and I haven't been able to wrap my head around how exactly the system works. Also, another note pertaining to this, the game has a codex or tutorial section, but it doesn't go too in-depth into any of the mechanics, really. The game is full of a lot of trial and error kind of stuff, and if you're someone who likes straightforward and thorough explanations of all the systems in a game, you may find yourself lost at many points in this one. Anyway, back to the shields. What I do know is that blocking, while not too necessary in the early game, is absolutely essential later in the game unless you're willing to kite enemies around with ranged weapons. You simply just cannot face tank enemies later in the game like you can early on. You will die, and you will die often without utilizing your shield. Doors are also crafted in the sawmill and are essential for traveling efficiently through the mines and dungeons. The doors are used as consumables that place a door on the floor you're on, as well as the floor above and below you. Now, there are handfuls of doors scattered across these dungeons that you can use, but having your own doors to place as you please is a far more effective way to traverse through these zones. This is especially true for the mine, which you'll return to for materials quite often. Once you blaze your own path of these doors deep into the mine where the more valuable materials are, you'll be able to use the same path to quickly descend to any depth. Bows are also crafted in the mill, but I share the same sentiment with those as I do with the cannons. I never really found either to be an asset in combat. The kitchen is pretty self-explanatory. You'll be crafting all your food here that you'll consume for health in your satiety bar. And yes, I looked up how to pronounce satiety and I couldn't believe it either. I was convinced it was going to be satiety or something similar. Anyway, there isn't much to say here, and there's a large variety of food items available to craft that require a wide array of ingredients. Simply put, as the quality of the food increases, so does the health and satiety that it replenishes. I do remember keeping myself fed and maintaining a stock of food early on was a difficult task. It seemed like my hunger was almost insatiable until I started targeting materials and utilizing the garden and egg farming available just outside your castle. The Alchemy Station is a pretty complex series of potions in which most of them have a progressive crafting system. For example, health potions. You have to make the base for this potion, which is beer, and couple that with another ingredient or two to make a weak health potion. Eventually, that potion won't be enough to replenish your health pool, so you'll need to move on to strong health potions that require mead as a base. You'll use a beer along with another ingredient or two, make mead, then couple the mead with another ingredient along with a weak health potion to produce the strong health potion. Beyond that will be the thick health potions, which require an entirely different potion base called essential oil, coupled with another ingredient and a strong health potion to produce a thick health potion. Now, that was a mouthful, but the potion crafting in Niffelheim is pretty complex, and it feels rewarding when you start targeting ingredients to supply yourself with enough potions to be successful when you're out in the world fighting. Most potions follow these same parameters, and you'll constantly be crafting and using potions throughout the game. Other potion types include bonuses to defense and damage versus specific types of enemies, antidotes to remove poisons, and combat steroids that increase critical chance or damage, just to name a few. Utilizing the potions at your disposal are very valuable and shouldn't be overlooked. Unless I was just fighting trash on the surface, I always had some sort of buff potion or potions active. And just a word of warning, there's a potion of regeneration in the game that gets rid of the debuff placed on you upon death. The debuff is pretty substantial, and it's not something that can be ignored. The debuff also stacks, so removing it turns into your top priority after a death. This potion can be very expensive and difficult to obtain early in the game, so take care in the early game to keep deaths to a minimum, or you may find yourself in a tight spot. Now, all of these crafting stations start with the most basic recipes, and each station can be leveled up to the next tier of production via spending random materials from across the various crafting stations. Each station has 5 possible upgrades, and in order to complete the game, you'll probably end up upgrading all 4 stations to the max level eventually. Other tidbits I should maybe mention. One big thing I've failed to touch on is the graphic styling of the game. It's all 2D hand-drawn art and is animated, in my opinion, fantastically for what it is. It's all very unique and well done. The dungeons are pretty repetitive as far as styling, but overall the art is done well. I'm neither here nor there on the music. I wasn't really wowed by anything, but it was fine. It went well with the game. Nothing much more to say about it. I finished the game in 40 game days at level 64, and from what I've seen, others are completing it at around day 70. I didn't feel as if I rushed anything, but maybe I did progress a little too fast because, and you won't feel this very early on, but later, this game becomes absolutely fucking brutal. Bosses become progressively more powerful the more you kill, and towards the end, my health pool was close to 500, and I was being chunked for anywhere between 100 to 200 health per hit. This is where the use of shields became an absolute necessity, because the kind of damage you start to take is completely insane at this point. Maybe someone with more knowledge or more playthroughs under their belt can weigh in with some more information on progression and about what level and day you should be completing the game. I just know I had 26 hours invested, and I didn't feel as if I rushed the content at all. There is only one vendor in the game in the temple zone. He sells some high dollar food, which is much better than anything you can craft, and he also sells various ingredients at pretty high prices. He sells the regeneration potions also that can be used to remove the death debuff if you're in a pinch, but they're pretty expensive from him too. Further experimentation proved that you can cheese this vendor pretty easily, selling potions and ingredients to him that you have an overabundance of, and pretty much buy anything you want. This was especially true for the food from this guy, as his food is absolutely insane compared to the shit you can craft yourself. I think some tweaking to this guy's price tables is probably something the devs should look into. Speaking of zones, there are 4 outdoor zones in the game, plus the temple, and a couple handfuls of dungeons scattered throughout these areas, plus the mine, which is accessed through your castle. I would say the enemy variety is pretty good throughout the game, but as I mentioned before, the dungeons are all pretty identical and became repetitive over time. I think some care could have been taken here and at least retexture these areas or something to give you some variety. I know after entering the 3rd or 4th dungeon in a row that looked exactly like the 2 or 3 before it, it started to get pretty old pretty quick. This was one of the 2 larger gripes I had with this game, so if you're looking for higher quality and varying assets, you're not going to find that here. Even the outdoor areas are very similar to one another. The other big gripe I had in this game is somewhat related to how insanely hard the enemies start to hit later in the game. I don't mind difficulty. In fact, I embrace it. You know, it's what separates interesting from boring and dull. But the health recovery system in this game becomes an absolute nightmare late game when you're taking these insane amounts of damage. There is no innate health regeneration, and with foods and potions, if your health is nearly depleted, it's going to be several minutes or more to regain all your health. Aside from that, there is a throne in your castle and a few scattered throughout other zones you can sit on to regain 4 health per second, and very infrequently you can find the little packs of fireflies in dungeons that work the same way as the throne. Early in the game, the system feels great, and stocking up on good food and potions really feels worthwhile and intuitive. Later on, though, it turns into this marathon of sorts where you're continuously running back and forth to your throne or trying to find fireflies to heal yourself after every fight because your food and potions just simply can't keep up. That aspect of the game became borderline unbearable for me, and I really started to question whether this was intended or I just completed the game way too early. Other possibilities include me just being shit at the combat in the game and taking too much damage, but getting popped for 20 to 40% of your health bar per hit, I don't know. I just felt like the throne healing system late game was unimaginative and it really felt like shit, I'd be honest with you. I just didn't like what it evolved into at all. Another thing that could be improved is when crafting, if you want to say craft 40 iron ingots. As far as I know, you have to spam the craft key 40 times. A way to craft multiple items by just selecting a number would be an easy addition and improve the feeling of the crafting quite significantly, I think. Questing is sort of an afterthought in this game. There are 2 characters that periodically give you quests to do, much like the priest's ultimatums, but with small rewards and without the penalty of not completing it. Nothing much more to say about them. They just work to, sort of accentuate the somewhat non-existent story. And we're about ready to wrap this up. Some aspects of this game were incredibly annoying, repetitive, and even unbearable at times, but most others were very well done, well thought out, and intuitive. I was shocked at how enjoyable the combat was while being so simplistic. They really nailed that, and the crafting system in this game really was top-notch. As I stated before, if you're a gatherer, hoarder, crafting freak, you're going to love this game. You'll get a lot out of it. The game retails for $20 on Steam. I saw it on sale recently for $10, and I would say it's definitely worth $10 for anyone even remotely interested in checking it out. Now, retail if you're a fan of the survival genre, or especially if you're a fan of gathering and crafting in games like this, I would say $20 is certainly fair and worth it. There really is a lot of content here to play through, and I've definitely seen many games that cost much more that offer much, much less. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the review, and hopefully you learned something today about Niffelheim. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content and you'd like to see more like it for other games, and let me know what you thought about the video in the comments or what you'd like to see in the future. Thanks for watching.